So I wanted to just give you a sense of the family I came from. This was a real driving quote for us. I come from a family of pioneers. My grandmother grew up in a little town in Illinois with, very little to speak of, went outside to use a hole in the backyard when she needed to relieve herself, and horse and buggy took her to school, and she was accepted one of 5 women in the country in 1922 to come to Columbia and study physical education. I mean, who does that in 1922, And so my roots in New York City go pretty far back, and she led protests for integration of hotels, and my mom took up the feminist cause and worked for some pretty famous feminists. And so New York City and causes have been a big part of my life, but Christ was not mentioned very often. So this kind of quote about kind of leading the way and being different was very much a part of my upbringing, but for whom was never really a part of the conversation. And, I moved into high school. Well, actually, I want to talk about that last piece first. My brother sadly had several learning disabilities that were undiagnosed until his 20s, and it caused a lot of rage in him. He was an alcoholic by the time he was 14, and was abusive with me in several ways. And there was just a lot of shame in his life, and it wasn't a Christian home, and my parents didn't know what was happening, and so there was some darkness there, and basically my role was to redeem children for my parents. And so as I moved into high school, I saw people around me with passion and purpose, and I saw them allowing their flaws to come through and not being a slave to perfectionism. I saw freedom from, abusive environments. And I didn't realize at the time that most were Christians, but the Lord was planting seeds back then. And I did accept Christ before I went to college. And so I went to college. I went to Princeton, and my dad had gone there. All my grandparents had gone to Ivy League schools. My parents both went to Ivy League schools, so it was kind of well, yeah, you're going to go to an Ivy League school. And there was definitely some pressure there. I give them a lot of credit for not making life really difficult in that way, but there was definitely a pressure. I worked at the UN, and when I was working at the UN was the first time that I was exposed to deep poverty in different places around the world. And it showed me that the Lord was going to do something with my life that wasn't necessarily exactly what my parents had done or my grandparents had done, that I wasn't going to be a victim in my life, that I was going to bring change. And I knew somehow Jesus was going to be at the center of that, but I wasn't sure how yet. I went to Paris and worked for Médecins du Monde, which does urgent care in war-torn countries. And for a year, I wrote about human rights violations that people were witnessing. Man is oil poured over him and he's lit on fire in front of his children. Or, woman violated in front of her son watching, and then, he is chopped up. And, night after night. And that was a dark time for my walk with the Lord, because I didn't understand why he was letting that happen and what he was calling me to do about it. But constantly, as I was trying to not turn my back on him, he kept saying this line, "Now you know too much, Amanda. Now you know too much. Yes, I sent you to this ivory tower to learn at Princeton, but this is what your life is going to be about. Now you know too much." And all my friends were taking jobs at banks and consulting firms, and I just knew that wasn't going to be what I was going to do. And then I went and spent some time in Central Europe, and the Bosnia War was happening, and I was doing get out the vote campaigns, and a guy came up to me and said, "Thanks for helping me vote, but I can't feed my family. Can you help me start a business?" And I said, "Wow, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to do that." And I started praying. I was trying to just return to the Lord and start asking him for direction, and I ended up at business school, and ended up at what was an incredible business school at that time. completely unskilled compared to everyone around me, but the Lord just kept saying, you know too much to ever turn your back, and I'm going to use you. I'm going to use you, Amanda. Just have faith. So I had faith, but what kept happening was I would get these degrees, and there would be people who came into my life and shamed me. People at offices, my brother, So every time I would get this new gold star, there would be something else that happened that would strip away joy that I got from it. And in his love, I realized what the Lord was saying was, I am going to equip you in these ways. I'm going to bless you in these ways, but I am never going to stop being a jealous God. And I'm always, in my love, going to make sure that you know that this work is not going to love you back. Your brother is not your ultimate protector. He never was, he never will be. And so a theme of my journey was, God arming me for impact, letting darkness seep in, but always keeping my heart humble with that darkness. So I remembered why I was being given these blessings. And I started thinking about, as I was at business school and starting to get these offers with lots of zeros on them, some boil vocation down to anything we get paid for. And I thought, well, maybe I can volunteer on the side, and I'm one of those people that's supposed to just get a big check and write checks, And God just kept saying, no. That's just too easy. And I think he knew I would get swept up in that way too easily. And so I did some time thinking about these definitions of vocation. And this was my favorite. Our vocation is where our greatest passion meets the world's greatest need. And some of you may have heard that by now, but just encourage us all to be thinking in this city that is just so full of lies about where meaning and impact and power come from. Are we really thinking about that Venn diagram and what's in the middle? And for me, that was really, really just critical. So I left business school unemployed, super humbling, slept on couches for 9 weeks because I hadn't found a job. One of the people that shamed me was my summer internship at this very renowned place that I had gotten a spot at, and then I just crashed and burned so badly. And so I didn't get the offer, which is like the ultimate shame in business school, and I left business school unemployed, and thankfully finally did find a job. But the Lord just kept saying, you need to remember that feeling of shame, and freedom from that is what I came to die for. Freedom from that being defined by anything but me is why I came to die. I met my husband and fell in love, and part of knowing Peter Trautmann is knowing Jesus. And I've always wished I were a person that you could say that about. I feel like Jonathan is one of those people. You're going to know Jesus in 5 minutes if you don't know him already, or will at least have heard about him. And I just have never, unfortunately, felt like I was one of those people. I was very skilled in different ways. I could support people who were like that, help them shine, but I didn't really feel like I shined much myself. And I was realizing the Lord was saying, you need to think about what's knitting you together, Amanda. And this concept of integrity kept coming back to me. Integrity in a moralist house that I was raised, integrity was said often. But I kept thinking about integrity more like shalom, just wholeness, integration. And when you think about the world today, there are a lot of people with integrity who are fighting for the really wrong things. And so I started realizing, fighting for causes is different than fighting for a person to be alive in people's hearts. And the causes were just not loving me back. And so I came to New York, and I did work for a corporate firm, Johnson & Johnson. But it was a healthcare company, and it was the Lord telling me, I am going to equip you. This is a time of equipping. Don't get used to this salary. Don't get used to any of these perks, but I'm going to use this for good. But he kept allowing some of those shaming situations. And as I started at Johnson & Johnson, I remember this being so critical to me, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees. The Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So I basically had taken that kind of classic verse to say, just love God a lot. Love him with this and that and this. Just love him. But as I started working at Johnson & Johnson, I started doing well and started getting some kudos. I came across this situation where I was being offered a job. I call it my KY story. KY, if you don't know, is a lubricant that is used in sex, as well as some other issues that people might have. And I was dating Peter Trautmann, now my husband at the time, and I came home, we were on a date, and I said, guess what? I was just offered this incredible job on the KY brand marketing team. And he kind of looked at me like, okay, what does that involve exactly? I said, well, there's marketing plans for every target audience. I mean, there's a marketing plan for married folks, there's a marketing plan for single folks, there's a marketing plan for gay folks, there's a marketing plan for, people in high school, and he was like, wait, so the goal is to, basically, you're gonna sell more the more all of those people have sex. And I just started getting angry, because I was like, you are just such a bummer. This is great news, this is an amazing team growing, and I tried to give him a pitch, and he said, but all day, what are you going to be thinking about exactly? Like, what are you going to be trying to do with what God's given you? So that date didn't go very well. I went in that Monday having prayed about it and realized, integrity. If I am not worshiping the Lord with all of my mind, the integrity of any other growth that was going to be happening in my life was there was going to be an albatross around it. And so I went in, and I went into this boss who was so hardcore, had never married, never would ever want kids, and just was all about work, and thought she had just given me the ticket of a lifetime to join this team. And I said, listen, Susan, I'm so sorry, but I'm a Christian, and I can't. I mean, I believe sex is a beautiful thing meant for marriage, and I can't be part of a team that is pitching sex and more sex to anybody, no matter who you're doing it with. And there was this silence that felt like about 15 minutes. And I really did think I was probably going to be let go, because if you didn't want it, there were 20 people that wanted it more. And her eyes filled with tears. And she said, I have so much respect for you. And then my eyes filled with tears. And she said, I'll find another great spot for you. Thank you. And I just was so taken aback. And I just felt the Lord saying, if you honor me, I will honor you. You have to trust. Seek the Lord, and all these things will be added unto you. And so that story helped me when the next kind of storm hit. I was married my first year, and my boss at the time just was like the king of shame. And he would say things to me like, when I wanted to go home and see my husband at all, you went to Princeton and Wharton, I would expect more than this. And it was just this constant shaming. And this verse, as I would come home feeling my idol of achievement, my idol of what the Ivy League was supposed to be, that I was supposed to be making people proud, as that was just slipping from my hands, as he made me feel like the weak link every day. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God, but honor the king. And I just felt him saying, who are you going to fear? Whose stamp of approval are you working for? And once again, it was that give and take. The Lord gives and takes away. So he gave me this role, but he kept taking away. It felt like he was taking away favor. But I came home, and after our first year of marriage, Peter just said, thank you for honoring your vows. I said, what do you mean? And he said, you honored me as your husband. He actually wanted you to honor him as your husband, in terms of time and devotion, but you honored me as your husband. And I honored God, and it was difficult, and he ultimately was let go, and I felt like the Lord was telling me, this terrible boss, this again, it's a job that will not love you back. And I just wanted to read you guys this quote. C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors, and he has something called the Screwtape Letters, which is a book. It's a really cool book. It's a devil, two conversations. It's a conversation between an uncle devil and a junior devil, and he's training the junior devil on how to get us into the evil one's hands. And so in this context, the enemy is actually the Lord. So he's giving this advice to the junior devil. Do remember, the only thing that matters is the extent to which you separate the man from the enemy, God. It does not matter how small the sins are, provided that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. Getting your man to murder is no better than cards, if cards can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. And I felt like that's what these employers who were shaming me, they were trying to lead me down these paths. They weren't bad people, but they were not my king. And God just kept testing me, asking me who I was going to follow. And eventually I became a mom, and I left the corporate world behind. We had 3 little boys in 4 years, so I was pretty sleep deprived and a hot mess for 5 years. My youngest one is 2.5 now, so I'm just starting to put complete sentences together. And this is when With All My Strength started coming into play. These 2 verses have become my job description quite literally. And there is no job that I feel like I fail at more than this one. I used to read these verses and think about the Lord and how beautiful the Lord was in loving me this way. And now it's hard. I read these and I feel I'm just so tired. I'm so sorry, Lord, that I can't be this. I've got maybe 10 minutes of these verses in me. I don't know how long you guys can last, but God says exactly to me every time I kneel before him. You had these Ivy League degrees, Amanda, you have all this confidence, but now I have you where you finally get it. The further away you are from being sufficient, the more all-sufficient I will be. The bigger the cross, the bigger that chasm, the bigger my bridge across it. And I have just felt that more completely, more desperately now. I've realized I yell at my kids in a way that I don't want to yell at them. And I've realized that as I yell at my eldest son, it's saying there will not be a bully in this house. There will not be an abusive big brother in this house. That it's little Amanda yelling back, in a way that I never did. And, little 4-year-old and 6-year-olds looking back at me, like raging at them. That's not what I pictured being as a mom. And so it's been humbling, but it also has been so freeing, because this mantle of being the kid who redeemed kids for my parents with their, drug dealer son. He ultimately became a drug dealer for 7 years in Colorado. And, we would just send care packages to him in jails in different places. And he accepted Christ, praise God, and got sober 16 years ago. But it's been a rough road. He made a lot of bad decisions and hurt a lot of people, including us. And so I think, it's been a time of uncovering some of the rage in me that was buried. And so the Lord has been good. He let that darkness in there. But our kids, my 4-year-old, man, he is walking with Jesus in a way I didn't think it was possible for a 4-year-old. And I think it's just because we have let that darkness be shown and explained. And so the promise that the Lord works everything together for good has been very real in our family. Sorry for the small font. I'll read this to you, but I thought this was just so powerful too. Just asking all of us, what percentage of us is still trying to run our own life? Whenever they are tending to the enemy himself, God, we are defeated. But there are ways of preventing them from doing so. The simplest is to turn their gaze away from him towards themselves. Keep them watching their own minds and trying to produce feelings there by the action of their wills. When they meant to ask him for charity, let them instead start trying to manufacture charitable feelings for themselves and not notice this is what they're doing. When they meant to pray for courage, let them really be trying to feel brave. When they say they are praying for forgiveness, let them be trying to feel forgiven. Teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling. And never let them suspect how much success or failure of that kind depends on whether they are well or ill, fresh or tired at the moment. But of course, the enemy, God, will not meantime be idle. Whenever there is prayer, there is danger of his own immediate action. To humans on their knees, he pours out self-knowledge in a quite shameless fashion. If ever man consciously directs his prayers, not to what I think thou art, but to what thou knowest thyself to be, our situation is for the moment desperate. And I just felt God saying again, I need you to be desperate, Amanda, if your life is going to be about me. And these kids, they are going to smell hypocrisy by the age of 2. So don't kid yourself. If you are a moralist pretending to be Christian because you think Christians are really admirable, they will smell that a mile away and they will be the first to leave the church. And so I have just cried a lot of tears asking the Lord to I'm a good faker. Help me stop faking it and help me be desperate for you. And I think this verse honestly did more harm than good for me because of my own misinterpretation of it for a while. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And I kept thinking, see, look, I have to keep performing. I have to keep getting degrees. I have to keep giving. And I would burn out and I would get angry. And that was my focus. And his focus was, wait a second. Am I Lord of your motives? Is all the credit coming to me? How often have you mentioned your degrees recently? Not that I bring that up in like dinner party conversation, but he knows that that's a big part of my identity. And that's okay that I'm proud of those things. We all are proud of things that we should be proud of in a healthy way, but who is getting the credit? Do you think for 1 second, Amanda, that you deserved all of those things? So that's been my latest quiet times, about just trying to finally release that misinterpretation of that verse. And so just as we come to the end, I've come to realize, especially in the last few years, which have been the hardest and the most joyful, the fruit of the Spirit most critical to developing integrity, that shalom in our lives, I think is patience. And this is my favorite definition. Patience is submission to someone else's authority. Isn't that just so cool? If you picture standing on a subway platform, like, when is it coming? You just submit to whoever decided making the schedule that day. I try to apply that, and it's really hard. But when you think about it in terms of the Lord, patience, waiting for the Lord, not always pursuing the next thing, but waiting is so difficult, especially for we New Yorkers, I think. And many of us have heard this story of Mary and Martha often, but I just encourage us all to just think about it maybe a little more often than we do. And this story is basically about 2 sisters. One's all about working. She's making the meal for Jesus. She's getting the house ready. And that's just my life so many days as the kind of first lady of a ministry. And just, is everything clean? Is everything okay? I might be yelling at everyone, but at least it's clean. And, that's Martha. And Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet. And just even how Jesus speaks, Martha, Martha. I just love that he says it again. Martha, Martha. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. Where are we just working instead of sitting at his feet? And I think this is just his final proclamation to us of when we are thinking, do I need to serve or do I need to sit and absorb and let the Holy Spirit course through my veins? Which one should I do? When in doubt, be Mary. He always says, before he says go, he says come. Come to me, you who are weary. And then he says go and make disciples of all nations. But he doesn't say go before he says come. Without just regularly experiencing the Lord, we will crash. And I have so many friends who have done that, and they're living double lives and they're hiding so much. And it's because they've had Christian-looking lives, but they have not had Christ freeing them. And so I just feel today that we all need that freedom. We need that release. And that's what he died to give us. And layer on top of that we have a real strategic enemy. And, he rears his head in Orlando, he rears his head in every corner of our city every day. It doesn't always feel that we're in the presence of God when we're in a world like that, but he promises, come near to God and I will come near to you. And he will come near to you. It's going to make all the difference for us. And just to wrap up, I just think about this. My life has been a lot about skill building, more skills. Okay, I'm a mom. Read the books. Talk to wise moms of 7 kids. And there's just been a lot of skill building and then not a lot of Mary, And we practice so many things, but do we practice the presence of God? That's a phrase that came across my screens recently. It's actually the name of Brother Lawrence is an author, and I encourage you guys to check it out. There's a whole book about practicing the presence of God. And the most important skill I have found the Lord say is learning how to hear God's voice. Do you know how to hear him as much as you know how to hear the people in your life who are shaming you or who are abusing you? And I had not learned how to hear God's voice. And, I remember saying, I wish he would just send me a fax back when we were faxing each other. I wish he would send me an email. I wish he would just yell at me, get my attention. And he is that still small voice that was mentioned earlier. And I see now why that's needed to be the case. But he wanted me to learn how to hear his voice. And it's the key to that deep joy. It's the key to me not raging against my children. It's the key to me not healing my own wounds through causing wounds in other people. Only when we're full of his love and power can we have that eternal God-ordained impact that we yearn to have.